Happy New Year, horror fans. Anchor Pete here, and I am happy to be here with my good friend, Mr. Danny Torkel. Danny, how are you doing today, Dr. Zayas?
I am doing very well. Just finished rewatching The Omen, which is one of my all-time favorites. One of the top five scariest movies of my life. So uh, I actually have lights on over there because the movie, still at almost 40 years old, legitimately creeps me out. So
Wow. Okay. This is my first time watching The Omen, and we are reviewing it tonight.
we're doing the unholy trinity, and so
Yes.
if you go on our channel now, we have reviews of Rosemary's Baby from 1968, and of course The Exorcist from 1973, and this is what is widely considered part three of this unspoken unholy trinity of horror films that came out within an 8-year period of each other and all deal with the Antichrist, the devil. So yeah, we thought, what better thing to cover during the Christmas season than, these movies about the Antichrist.
Yes, yes. And it's some dark stuff. There's similarities between all three, and there's differences between all three. Tonight, we're talking about The Omen from 1976. And one of the things right off the bat that separates The Omen from The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby is that it's an original screenplay. It's not adapted from an existing source. We don't have William Peter Blatty's Exorcist, and I'm trying to think of the writer of Rosemary's Baby.
Ira Levin.
Oh, good. Yes, dude, you're on top of things tonight, man.
This is a DVD. This isn't even a Blu-ray. That's how long I've had this. But I was watching a bonus feature on it, and they actually had a spiritual advisor, who basically came to the producer Harvey Bernard or Bernhard and told him the idea that he had, and then he told David Seltzer, and it kind of spiraled that way. And originally they wanted to do all this stuff with like gargoyles and covens of witches and everything, and then it got to the director, Richard Donner, and Richard Donner was like, no. We need to set this in the real world with things that can actually happen, and that will really mess with people's heads if there's no supernatural stuff at all. And there really isn't in the movie. Like, there's implied supernatural stuff, but there's
Right.
nothing directly supernatural about it, which is
Right.
another thing that I love about the movie, because Rosemary's Baby is objectively telling you, Satan rapes this woman, and there's a coven of witches that live in a New York City apartment building.
Right.
The Exorcist shows you a full-blown demonic possession in graphic detail.
Right.
And this movie just kind of hints at everything.
I remember that I watched the Omen remake from 2006, and I pretty much got from when Julia Stiles falls right on, and so that pretty much spoiled the third act of this movie for me. And I don't think I watched it straight through. I think I cut back and forth. But David Thewlis was in that, and he was playing the part that David Warner played. When Julia Stiles dies in that version of the movie, I think that's actually worse than the scene in this movie. However, if I just saw this for the first time in 1978 or any time after that, it would just blow me away, because the subject matter of this movie is super, super disturbing.
Yeah, oh yeah. That 2006 movie, I think on its own is not a bad movie. It has good acting, as you said. But the movie was made specifically because it was 2006, and they were like, we're going to release it on June 6, 2006. And that's the only reason that movie was made.
Right.
I think what sets this movie apart also for me is the fact that it's Gregory Peck, who is one of the most legendary actors who ever lived. And again, maybe it's unfair, my opinion of this movie, but Gregory Peck has such an important part of me growing up as well. His in 1950, late 1950s, he did a version of Moby Dick where he plays Captain Ahab.
Yes.
And my parents had that on VHS, taped off television. And I must have watched that again. Like, I don't know why. My favorite movie of all time is Jaws. So maybe I was like, oh, whale, shark, I'll just watch it. I must have watched him as Captain Ahab 20, 30 times, all the time that movie was on in my house. Like, my mother and I to this day still will quote 1955 Moby Dick to each other just because it's so ingrained in my head. And he played, of course, Atticus Finch,
Right.
which that is my mother's favorite book and favorite movie, to the point where if my father, and this is a 100% true story, if my father had not intervened, my name would be Atticus Finch.
Okay.
My sister,
Torkel?
yes, Atticus Finch Torkel would have been my name.
Right.
My sister's middle name is Harper, for Harper Lee.
Harper Lee. Yes.
Because my mother was such a fan of that book. So I grew up watching Moby Dick and To Kill a Mockingbird. And then, so when I saw this, I was like, oh, it's the dad from To Kill a Mockingbird. It's Captain Ahab. And, you know, he's such a great actor, and you don't get actors like this. I was watching, like I said, the behind the scene. There's this one like little behind the scenes featurette on this where Richard Donner's like, I hadn't really made that many big movies at that point, and I was like, this movie's going to be a failure. And then all of a sudden, Gregory Peck is in my movie, and you're like, I read Gregory Peck did this movie in part, sadly, because his son had just committed, in real life, his son had committed suicide. And he was like, well, he's like, he had contemplated retiring from acting. And then he decided, look, I can play the role of a, confused, grieving father. I can do that because I'm living it right now. And like, there were elements of the script that like made him obviously empathize with Robert Thorne, and so that's what made him take the role.
So to see him in a horror movie, that's kind of different from all these other classic horror movies that you and I have talked about on the show so far. A lot of the people that we see in these older horror movies, it's like they start out in horror and then they become something bigger as their career goes on. But in this case, it's like this is an established actor. He's been in iconic roles already.
Yeah.
In this role. And what's interesting about that is, since I had only seen the end of the remake, I didn't know Damien's origins. I knew that he was the Antichrist and he was the son of the devil, but I didn't know like how he got on Earth or like what was the conception. I thought that the mom gave birth to him. That was just my assumption watching the movie. So in that very first scene, that was a real interesting twist for me. That like his original biological baby, the Thorne child, had died, and then this other baby was there like at the exact same moment. And I mean, obviously that was staged or whatever, but it adds this layer to that the Robert Thorne character, where it's like his wife doesn't even know that that's not her actual kid. And I think that's real interesting. It kind of shows his motivation, because it's like he's not moving forward. He's not sitting like, hey, there's something weird about this kid. He's trying to play it up like things are normal because of this big lie that he's been just covering forever. You feel like with that opening scene that you should dislike, Gregory Peck. But he's super charming in this. And then his wife, too, is very lovable. And I actually was not familiar with the actress. That's Leigh Remick, right? Or
Leigh Remick, yeah.
Remick. Okay, so it's Leigh Remick, right? And she plays Catherine Thorne. And first of all, I thought she was just incredibly beautiful. She had like the most piercing blue eyes. And I just felt really bad for her throughout this whole movie. I knew what her fate was ultimately going to be. And I feel like her fate actually wasn't as bad as Julia Stiles' ending ultimately. but like you wanted her to be happy, you wanted their family to be okay, and then they have this sort of demon seed, and I think that the whole time you're watching this movie, you want there to be some kind of solution, but it's like, nope, this is the worst possible scenario for everyone. I mean, every single person in this movie dies essentially, except for Damien, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's collateral damage too, because you have this supporting cast, and you have Patrick Troughton, who plays the priest that tries to warn them about Damien. And I didn't realize it, before I'd seen this movie, but that's one of the doctors from Doctor Who.
Isn't he like one of the original doctors, like from the when the show came on in the 60s?
He's the second Doctor in Doctor Who. So the first time he like regenerates, that's him. But when he died, I thought that was a really cool death for something in 1978, right?
Oh, I think all the deaths in this movie work. And I remember, like, again, as a kid, especially, like I actually like explained to Charlotte what an omen was. Like, because you're watching the movie, especially as, when you're younger, and you're like, what the hell is an omen? Why isn't this called the Antichrist or the child of Satan? And like David Warner's character is, he might appear to be exposition guy, but he's necessary for the movie to make sense, and to like connect everything, and like you're sitting there and you're following these weird blurry lines and you're like, what the hell is going on here? And then it gets explained to you and you're like, oh shit. Like, and then he shows the picture of himself and you're like, oh crap. And you're like waiting with bated breath for that moment to come.
Yeah. And boy, when that moment does come, that was pretty incredible. I thought for 1978, just the glass, just,
Oh my God.
I thought that he was going to get taken out in the cemetery with that sequence, and I just want to say about David Warner, before we kind of talk about the cemetery and that death. I've always liked David Warner, like since I was a kid, right? He's in Star Trek, The Undiscovered Country, Star Trek 6. He has a pretty memorable role in that, and then he's always like a side character in stuff, like most people remember him from Titanic as like Billy Zane's right hand man. Do you remember the Lovecraft movie we watched that had him in it? It was like 30 minutes long.
Oh, the Evil Clergyman, was that it?
Yes, remember he was in that.
Yes. He's got it, like, I think on IMDb he's got over like 200 credits. He's been working since like the 60s or like the late 50s, early 60s. He's still alive. There's an alternate universe where he was Freddy Krueger. He was he was one of the first choices to be Freddy Krueger.
Wow.
Until they decided that Freddy was going to have like a lot of makeup on, and then they realized it didn't matter if they casted somebody who people would recognize, because the guy's going to be wearing a ton of makeup. And so they ended up working with, obviously, Robert Englund, took over the character, and now anytime you ever think of Freddy, it's just Robert Englund. But yeah, there was a time where David Warner was thought to be like an older, kind of less makeup, more like ominous Freddy for the original movie.
Let's talk about that cemetery scene, though, right? Because you mentioned that cemetery scene really affecting you, and you couldn't even watch it as a kid. That was by far, I thought, the scariest sequence in the whole movie, and I just thought it was so well done, especially when they were able to escape the cemetery, and you just heard the dogs like howling over and over again. That was really chilling.
Yeah, Gregory Peck catching his arm on the post, going like, that's just like one of those things that, like, when you watch it, you're like, oh God.
Yeah.
And
I thought that David Warner was gonna like fall and get his head in the spike, kind of like the kid in Halloween You
So
know?
I swear to God, Charlotte sat on the couch and was like, "Is one of these guys going to get killed? But like Michael Myers killed that guy in Halloween?" And I was like, "Well, no, but stick around." and, and so like when Gregory Peck caught his arm, she was like, "Oh," and so yeah, but she thought that too. She was like, I wonder if he's gonna get like the kid. It's gonna go through his head. I was like, that would have been something. But
Yeah.
I
Just
I do love how David Warner at least two other times in the movie after you see that picture of him, like he's walking around and he's like you could tell he's like looking like fuck.
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
like there's the scene where he's in Megiddo and he goes under the arch and there's like some dirt that falls and he's like, what the no, like he's getting ready to cover his head. So like I like that he's like he believes it so much that he's like
Yeah.
cognizant that I'm gonna get decapitated and I gotta protect my neck at any
Yeah.
point.
Dude,
Uh
if I was him and I saw like all those crosses and stuff in Patrick Troughton's room, and if I looked at his journal and shit, I'd be freaking out too, man. Especially
yeah.
the way Patrick Troughton got it, you know?
I mean, when I'm not gonna lie, like I probably, and I'm talking like back in the VHS days, I must have paused like play pause, play pause, play pause to watch that decapitation scene with my friends. And it's so amazing because you literally can see the dummy head. And then apparently the fact that it spun like that was a complete like they didn't plan on that. It was the way it hit the dummy that caused like a natural like I think Richard Donner called it a cue ball effect where it just
Yeah.
and Richard Donner said like we had no money for that, so I just grabbed every camera I could and we filmed it at every angle. And he said that he intentionally played like the different angles of it continuously because he said when people saw that that scene was going to happen that they would cover their eyes and they would go 1 2 3 okay it's over, but it would still be spinning and they'd be like he said that when he went to screenings of it he heard like a second scream where like people were screamed when he got his head cut off and then like 3 seconds later there was another scream because they like looked up and they saw it again. Does Damien know that he's evil in this movie? You know, he's a 4 to 5 year old kid.
Yeah.
Does he, you know, that's why to me the scariest character in this movie is Mrs. Baylock.
Oh,
She's,
yes.
oh my God, like just the way the camera zooms in on her face and like she's controlling all the actions, but like does Damien at the end is on the he's saying he's a 5 year old kid go his dad's holding a knife to him and he's going daddy no and you're like yeah he's the son of the devil but does he even understand that does he know that like does he understand like he and Harvey Stevens like he was so, like his face was so creepy at parts of this movie.
Yeah.
Like the scenes of him in the car on the way to the church, the scenes with him in the car looking at the animals at the
The zoo,
zoo,
yeah. Yeah.
he just has this look on his face, and you're just like, ooh.
Yeah.
So quick little funny story about Harvey Stevens.
Go ahead.
We met him at a horror convention a couple of years ago. He
Okay.
was like the nicest guy in the world.
Yeah.
And he did a card reading of one of the Ghost Girl cards for one of their Exorcist cards. And he like
Oh,
did a reading of it and I filmed it and I put it up on Geeks of
Geeks of
Doom's
Doom.
YouTube channel at the time. And here I am having like been terrified of this movie my whole life. And I'm like, I'm hanging out with adult Damien now. This is fucking weird.
Full
It
circle,
was
man.
Yeah.
Full circle. You got one of those black lines in your pictures now, man. You gotta
Oh,
check your
Jesus.
Instagram, see if it's on there.
Oh.
In the end, right before 2022 begins, we got this nice little dire feeling, this doomed feeling. So I appreciate you talking about these movies with me. And I hadn't seen Rosemary's Baby. I hadn't seen this, and so I feel like I can put that on my horror scorecard now after watching these two.
I guess we should be kind of generic YouTubers and do a quick ranking of them, since we talked about 3 movies.
Wait, that's generic YouTubers. That's what I do on like all my shows.
That's what every YouTuber does. It's
Yes.
making lists and
Everything's
and
a list.
Yeah,
That's true. Okay. Why don't you go first, because it sounds like you've given this some thought.
So I'm probably gonna upset the apple cart here, but I'm gonna go Omen, Rosemary's Baby, Exorcist. I absolutely do not dislike The Exorcist. I genuinely like it. I genuinely think it is a great horror movie, but there is something to The Exorcist subscribes to the show don't tell formula. The other 2 movies are kind of the don't show and tell formula, and I feel like there's more tension and more scares, for me at least, in those other 2 movies. My opinion of Rosemary's Baby completely changed rewatching it. I genuinely loved it watching it this time. Whereas I kind of always thought it was a little too slow and a little boring. I thought it was so good. It's such a good movie with such great performances, and yeah, I think the ending is kind of like, as a parent, it's kind of bizarrely romantic in a way. Like the idea of a mom like settling, like, I'm going to take care of my child no matter what's wrong with her, well, no matter what's wrong with him, even if he does look like his father, who is Satan. The Omen holds a very special place in my heart for reasons I've already said. It's probably top 3 or 4 on my list of the scariest movies I've ever seen. Even now, rewatching it gave me goosebumps. For 2 straight hours, I had goosebumps. And yeah, and The Exorcist is number 3 on my list by default, because I grew to love Rosemary's Baby so much, and because I've always loved The Omen this much. But again, that's nothing against The Exorcist. I view it highly. I just don't love it the way other horror fans love it.
Okay. You know what? Here's the deal. Our rankings are the same. And I'm going to use a criteria, though, for this. I think that the best horror movies and the best horror shows, like a good example would be Midnight Mass, that we've talked about too on here, is where you really care about the characters. You don't want them to experience the horror. So going by that criteria, I would actually put The Omen first, because I really cared about Gregory Peck and his wife, and I felt bad for them for what happened to them. And I cared about the side characters too, particularly David Warner, right? Then with Rosemary's Baby, I really cared about Mia Farrow, Rosemary. Her husband can go fuck himself, but her, I really care about. And I really hate Minnie too, because she's just so fucking annoying. Then with The Exorcist, Ellen Burstyn is just like one of my favorite actresses ever. She's incredible. And Linda Blair does this amazing performance. I mean, everyone's great in The Exorcist. However, if I say about the characters that I genuinely care about the most, I'd go Omen, Rosemary's Baby, then The Exorcist. So we have the same ranking there.
Oh, there. Nice.
Yeah, man.
Synergy.
So, there are apparently many reasons to go see the movies in the theater this year. However, it was kind of hard to with COVID, and Danny just keeps pulling movies out of a hat. He's like, "Oh, did you see this? Did you see this?" And like, I personally have barely seen any horror from 2021. And so our next thing for January is that we're going to watch horror from 2021 that is acclaimed, and we're going to make our top 10 list just like we did last year. Until then, we're going to wrap it up for our Unholy Holidays. Happy New Year, everybody. And Mr. Torkel and I will see you guys in 2022.